Hello, everyone, and welcome to our week 4 pre-recorded lecture for Taiji and Qigong in our spring semester here in 2021. Thanks for watching. I want to try to move through this material quickly and not keep you all for too long. There's two main things that I want to talk about today. One is your health journal assignment, and two are some principles that we can bring to our Taiji and Qigong practice that I think are very useful ways to think about what we're trying to achieve at the core of our practice, okay? So first, let me share my screen and we'll talk about this health journal assignment that I'm going to be giving to you all. So as providers of care, one of the challenges that we will meet is figuring out how to help motivate our patients to change their health situation, right? How to make them active participants in their health. Part of this is actually getting our patients to realistically look at the patterns of their life, of what they're doing, and see what they're doing in their life patterns that may not be as effective as it could be in helping them achieve whatever kind of healthcare goals they want to set. So we'll talk about goal setting as well, but before we set any goals, it's important to have a realistic view of the landscape that we're dealing with. So here's our health journal assignment. This is an opportunity for each of you to look at your own patterns and actually document them. This will be something that's handed in. The basic goal being to sort of externalize the process of logging what your health looks like. So maybe some of you all already do this. Maybe some of you have never done this. Maybe some of you have done a different version of this. It's a fairly flexible project. So if you have different ideas of how you want to organize the information, that's fine. But here's sort of minimum requirements that I'd like you to look at. So first of all information that you submit is completely confidential. You don't need to include any information that you are uncomfortable sharing, right? I'm a healthcare professional. I will be very, very careful with any information that you share with me. And again, if there's anything you're uncomfortable sharing, please just keep it to yourself, but do engage in the spirit of looking at your own patterns of health and being honest with yourself about what the lay of the land is. All right, so the assignment is due in 3 weeks, so February 18th. That's week 7, right in the middle of our semester together. For the first week, the first 7 days, you're just going to be tracking your regular habits. So we'll talk about that. And the second week, we're going to talk about setting a goal for yourself, right? And trying to make that goal an appropriate goal to try to meet some of the ways that you might be able to better support your own health, right? So what do we want to track? We want the date. We want sleep, and sleep is not just, yes, I slept. It's when did you go to bed? When did you rise? How was your sleep quality? Did you take any naps during the day? Hard on the heels of that, we'll have your energy level during the day. That's a 0 to 10 scale. Obviously, just an estimate. And if it ebbs or flows, you might want to make a note of that too. So you may start out low energy, go to high energy, end up low energy, steady state, whatever it happens to be. So making some notes, and especially if you have any notes of what may have affected that energy level, that will be useful as well. Very important, everything you eat, drink, or otherwise consume, you want to take a note of it and be detail oriented. So snacks also, right? So anything you put in your mouth, we want to know about, right? Anything you eat, drink, or consume, right? Last time we talked about sort of supporting normal, and that's how our goal, that's what one of our main goals is as healthcare providers. We want to know after you eat, is your digestion normal? And there's a range of what normal is, but we want to make notes of any kind of indigestion, any kind of acid reflux that you might get, any kind of abdominal bloating or discomfort that you experience as well. This is part of your digestion. And keep in mind that even if you've had indigestion your whole life, it's actually not normal to have indigestion after you eat. An ideal digestion, not even ideal, a normal digestion would be you eat something and it fairly smoothly transits through your body without really disrupting your game so much, right? The next thing is frequency and quality of bowel movements. And I know this may sound like TMI, but as a Chinese medical practitioner, you need to become very, very comfortable in discussing this, right? As my mentor, Steve Woodley said, anything that comes out of the body, we are very, very, very interested in, right? Our medicine was designed before lab tests and MRIs and all this other kind of stuff. So we get our information from other sources, and things like what your bowel movement is like gives us very, very valuable information. And if you're further along in your education, you know this. If you're just more towards beginning, you will learn a lot about this. But we want to know how often it happens and what's the quality. So loose or dry, urgent, hesitant, if there's any discomfort, all these things, any blood or mucus in the stools also we want to know about, right? Then lastly, we want to know about this moving area, right? This moving. So what kind of movement, what kind of exercise you've been doing. I put some examples here: walking, jogging, yoga, qigong, whatever your movement pattern is. If it's just activities of daily life, if it's walking from your house to your mailbox, then that's movement. We want to know about it. Along with this, you can put any kind of persistent discomfort that occurs with these basic movements. You're like, okay, I took a hike and my right knee hurt. Well, that could be interesting, right? So these are all areas that you're going to be asking your patient about. So we start by asking ourselves about that and actually documenting it, because that enforces a degree of sort of forthrightness that we sometimes skip if we're just sort of casually thinking about it, right? So this shouldn't take too long to document, but it is something that you will need to do every day. I don't anticipate, if you set up a little notebook or something by the side of your bed, you can put it in a spreadsheet, you can put it in a Word doc. I don't really care about the format as long as it's something that you should be able to turn in. And if that's, scanned JPEGs or PDFs, that's fine. If it's a spreadsheet you should share, that's also fine. But you should be ready to turn this in when you're done. And it shouldn't take longer than about 5 minutes a day. So not a huge ask, right? 5 minutes is probably generous. You can make it longer if you really want to turn this into more of an introspective opportunity, right? We have some optional categories, and honestly, the more thorough you make this, the more useful it will be for you, and then down the road for your patients as well. So any acute or persistent emotions, what I like to tell my patients is that it's natural for humans to experience all emotions, right? During any given day or week, we're supposed to experience sadness and happiness and grief and irritability and anger and joy and all these things. But they shouldn't be particularly persistent. They should sort of flow through you. So we're really interested in those sticky emotions, or the emotions that sort of are a background emotional tenor for your activities, right? So if you feel like you're irritable all day long, we'll find out that that's a very interesting thing for us in Chinese medicine. If you feel like you are in a state of grief or sadness, that's also very interesting for us. If you feel like you are unreasonably happy, that's also good information for us to learn, right? So you can log that as well. Stress levels during the day, you may want to log that as well. You may find some interesting correlations that you weren't aware. So often the 0 to 10 scale is very useful here. Any acute temperature shifts, right? So not like, oh, I went outside and I got cold because it was cold outside, but like I was sitting and all of a sudden I got a sweat, or I felt chilled, or I woke up at night and I was sweaty. This kind of thing is interesting for us as well. So any acute temperature shifts, I often pose this to my patients as a question of like, how's your subjective body temperature during the day? Is it consistent? Do you have certain parts of your body that are persistently hot or cold? How's your circulation? Does this change during the day? These are ideas you can start kicking around. Any acute health events, if you're like a migraine sufferer, you may want to start logging your migraines to see if there's a pattern there. If you suffer from asthma or something, if you have an acute injury, anything that comes up that's more on an acute basis, we want to know about as well. If you have an existing medical issue and if you're hypertensive or pre-hypertensive and you monitor your blood pressure, this would be a nice thing to keep in a health journal as well. If you monitor blood glucose, this is also interesting for us. If you are monitoring weight, we can have a discussion about how useful monitoring weight is, but if you want to, you can include that as well. Your subjective temperature, especially for fertility patients, this is an interesting thing to monitor. And any other biomarkers that you regularly measure, you can include in your health journal as well. And if you were a person who has a regular menstrual cycle, any notes on your cycle can be interesting, although for 2 weeks, it's not really as much good information as for the duration of a whole cycle, right? A whole cycle gives us much better information than a snapshot of a half or approximately half of a cycle, right? But you can include this as well if you feel so inclined, right? So this is week 1 and 2, all of this information every day. Again, the more comprehensive you make it, the more useful it's going to be for you and for any provider that you have. The optional categories are truly optional. You don't need to include those. And anything else that I haven't mentioned that you want to include, you certainly can. After 1 week of doing this, you take a pause and you look back over your journal and you say, okay, what does my health look like? And is there something that I could improve? And if there is something that you think that you could improve in your activities of daily life, your life habits, Then what you're going to do, oh, there's a few other ones. Quiet time, meditation, and prayer. You can log that as well. Social activities, especially during COVID times. I feel like this is something we need to kind of keep track of and that we need to ask our patients about. What is your support? What kind of conversations are you having? Are you reaching out to people? Are you having a phone call with a sibling or a parent or a loved one? If you're living alone, it becomes even more important, right? I can tell you I don't live alone. I live in a household full of 4 people, and we have a little bit of social contact outside, but our social contact has become very, very, very close during this time, right? I spend a lot of time with an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and my wife these days. And this will actually flavor sort of what my social life looks like compared to normal times. So especially during times of shelter in place and reduced social contact, it's important to actually ask your patients about this and ask yourself about that, because human beings are very, very social animals. We have a social body that demands maintenance as well. And if this is not being attended to, it can be a source of a lot of actual health issues, especially psycho-emotional, but otherwise as well. What we're going to do with this, actually, here, we'll talk about SMART goals in a second. At the end of your project, you're going to look at your patterns of your life. With your knowledge of Chinese medicine and Yang Shen, you do a little bit of self-diagnosis, like where are you not normal? Where could things improve? Where could things be a little bit more sort of in the realm of normal? And how could we move that needle towards normal, right? So most of you are sort of towards the beginning of your TCM education, so we won't necessarily be able to identify specific patterns of disharmony such as spleen qi deficiency or blood deficiency or blood stasis or anything like that. But if you are further along in your education, as I know a few of you are, then identifying these patterns, these TCM patterns explicitly is something you could do here. And we're just looking to connect the dots. Say, okay, well, my stress levels go up in these circumstances. Oh, my sleep is good these days, but not these days. Why is that? You know, my activity levels are like this and my stress levels are like this. Is there a correlation? Oh, my diet. When I eat these things, then maybe my digestion starts to skew a little bit, right? So take a look at that and make a note and analyze yourself as if you were a patient. And then think about, like, what are the SMART goals that you could be setting if you didn't set one? And I'm going to cycle back to that. So here at the top, I said, for week 1, we're just tracking. For week 2, we actually want to set a goal. So what does that mean, setting a goal? Let's take a look. So we want to set what's called a SMART goal. SMART is an acronym, easy to remember, and it means specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So specific, for instance, after the first week, you're like, oh, it turns out I snack a lot. I want to eat healthier. Not such a great goal. What does that mean? What exactly will you eat? What will you eliminate? So if you are not eating that healthy, it's like, okay, I'm going to stop eating, I don't know, potato chips, or I'm going to drink less, or whatever it happens to be. And drink less meaning instead of having whatever, 2 beers a day, I'm going to have 2 beers a week, or whatever it happens to be for you, right? It needs to be specific, right? Measurable is kind of like specific. It's a way of informing specific. Not I will exercise this week, but how much will you exercise this week? Are you going to exercise 20 minutes a day? Are you going to exercise 2 hours a day? Are you going to exercise 3 hours a week? You make it very specific and measurable, right? So you can look at the end of the project and say, okay, I did this or I didn't do this, right? Achievable is really, really, really key. Our impulse when we first start out as healthcare providers is to see our patients and give them a long, long laundry list of things that we would think could really improve their health without actually thinking, could they do it? You know, you can give somebody a great handout like, okay, you are pre-diabetic and obese and hypertensive. Here's the diet plan, the exercise plan that you need to do. Here's a stress management plan that you need to do, all this stuff. And they get this stack of papers. They're like, this is great information. And they throw it away because it's just too much. So achievable. A good sort of measuring stick is we should have about 70% confidence that we can achieve it, right? And what the health coaches tell us is that if it's much more than 70%, 90% or above, we need a more challenging goal, you know? Okay, I'm gonna move, instead of taking a 20-minute walk, I'm gonna take a 22-minute walk. Oh, maybe that's not ambitious enough, right? But if we go from a 20-minute walk to 2 hours of high intensity interval training, it's probably not, right? It's probably not achievable. So we want to set a more achievable goal somewhere between the 60% and 90% idea that we could achieve it, right? If it's anything above this, it's probably too modest. If it's anything less, this is probably too ambitious, right? So we want to hit that sweet spot between too much and not enough, right? Realistic is the same thing as achievable. It just makes it kind of rounds out the acronym. So it's a SMART goal instead of a SMAT goal, right? So we have realistic. We'll just say that it's the same thing as achievable. And then time bound. When are we going to look at this again? One of the traps that we can fall into as providers is just kind of keeping an open-ended engagement with our patients where we're not setting a time where we're going to look and see what the progress is, right? If somebody comes in for acupuncture with me, I want to say, all right, we're going to give you 6 acupuncture treatments, and then we're going to examine what the results are and see whether we want to continue or refer out to somebody else or dismiss you from care, right? If we met our goals in those 6 weeks, great. If we didn't meet them, well, how do we need to adjust those goals, right? So what is your time-bound analysis of this? And I suggest that if you're setting a goal after week 1, then your time should be after 1 week. You should see how well you did on those goals of whatever it is, getting to bed earlier or drinking more water or getting more exercise or eating more warm foods and less pre-prepared foods or whatever your goal is, right? So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. After week 1, you write down 1 goal. If you think you're just like the best and you don't have anything you could improve in that time, still figure out 1 little small step forward you could make, right? You just need to stretch a little bit, right? So this is your health journal assignment. I want you to go ahead and track the areas that are in the assignment, which I'll post to Neo. After 1 week of tracking it, you set yourself a goal, you write that goal down. It should be a SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And then you track for another week. And I'll tell you that the act of actually tracking and writing things down is a form of accountability that's very powerful, right? So it's kind of like casting a magic spell. If you actually write it down, you're making your intention clear, and you have better odds of actually following through. And often we'll do this with patients where we actually say, okay, so our goal is to get 20 minutes of regular exercise every day and to go to bed before 10:30 every night the next week, right? And we write it down. And some people go to the whole length of having somebody sign off like it's a contract. And there's some research that says that this is an effective co-motivating strategy. I find that a little bit heavy-handed, but you'll adjust to your own sort of strategy as you do it. Some people are more drill sergeants than others, but this is something you can do to create a sense of partnership with your patients and here with yourself, right? With yourself. And then at the end of the week, a little bit of reflection and analysis. You look at your patterns, you look at what you're doing, you see, try to connect some dots. If you know some TCM, basic diagnoses, you can kind of try to think about that. And then you can also reflect on, hey, did you achieve your goals? Why or why not, right? But it shouldn't be a long analysis. Just a couple paragraphs is fine, right? And this will be turned in week 7, okay? And we can talk about this when we meet in person on Thursday. All right, so that's the assignment. There's also a handout, right? So we'll take a look at the handout together. So I wanted to explore this idea of 5 principles of effortlessly effective body being by this gentleman, Peter Ralston, who used to be a local martial arts instructor who developed a martial art based on some of the same martial arts that we practice together, Taiji and Qigong. He called Changshin, which means I think something like upright heart or something like that. But he has these 5 principles, which I think are really worth talking about. We'll get to those in a second. We have some acupoint vocabulary. So we're going through these regions of the joints, right? And we talked about 5-4-5 across the wrist, 7-7-9 across the yin side of the wrist, where we have heart 7, pericardium 7, and lung 9. Then we're moving to the ankle. So we have 3 points. There's way more than three points on the ankle. The ankle is a complicated joint, but we'll talk about UB60, which is located right behind the lateral malleolus, which is your sort of ankle bump on the outside of the leg. And I recommend you go ahead and look these up for a visual picture if the language doesn't click with you. The other thing that I'll note when going through these acupoint vocabulary is that it's important to know these points backwards and forwards. And what I mean by that is you should be able to look at a picture, identify the point, and talk about the anatomy of that point as detailed here, but also look at the anatomy and figure out what point that is. So forwards and backwards, right? So if I said to you, we're looking for a point that's behind the ankle joint, midway in the depression between the prominence of the lateral malleolus and the posterior border of the Achilles tendon, you should be able to go, he means UB60, right? Or Kunlun Mountains, right? So we have UB60, we have GB40 at the ankle joint in the depression anterior and inferior to the lateral malleolus. And we have stomach 41, which is a little bit more on the top side of the foot, in between some of the tendons there. So these are three really important points. I needle these every day in clinic, literally every day. So we want to start building out a vocabulary by becoming roughly familiar with these, right? So moving on, we have these 5 principles of effortlessly effective body being that our friend Peter Ralston came up with. And I'm going to open up a slide and see if we can't talk about it a little bit. So we have centering, grounding, being whole and unified, relaxing, and being calm. If we take all of these together, they describe how sort of the mind and body set that we want to take into especially our Taiji and Qigong practice, right? Really important here is that centering is not abstract, right? Centering is something that we do with our intention, right? So I've already talked about 3 main centers in the body: the belly, the heart, and the head, right? These are 3 centers. And a center we can identify as a place where energy likes to gather, where energy naturally gathers. It's sort of a distribution center, right? So I'm from New York City, and whenever I hear centers, I think about traffic maps, right? And in New York City, there's all these different circles. There's Columbus Circle, and then there's Union Square. Anywhere where Broadway crosses an avenue is sort of where things come together in the city, and stuff kind of gathers there, right? This is a center. And we recognize centers which already exist in your body. You already have a center of mass, every single one of you. Although some of you might be like, well, I have a center of mass, but do I actually have a lower dandian? We can talk about a dandian on Thursday, what that means. It means being able to focus the mind and feeling attention and move the body from the center. And we already started doing that last week when we put our hand on our belly and our lower back and we shifted our weight forward and backwards. We're naturally starting to move the awareness into the belly and move from this lower center, which is really the driver of most of martial arts practice or physical practice, right? And definitely of our Taiji practice. So centering, really, really, really key. Grounding. Developing a stronger connection and feeling association with the ground and drawing power from the ground. And this was also part of our weight shifting exercise that we did before, where we're shifting the weight forward and backwards, but we're focusing on the sensation of the feet, right? So the sensation of the feet, feeling the weight, that actually grounds you. It puts you in touch with the ground, right? Puts you in touch with the ground. And if you've ever played push hands with somebody who's skilled, when you push on them, they can either feel like they're not there, or it can feel like you're pushing a wall, but what you're actually feeling is the ground. They're able to take the energy that's coming into them as you push and ground it down into their feet, so that your push actually goes right through their body into the ground, right? So centering and grounding. This is fundamental to almost all kinds of cultivation practices, east, west, north, and south. They all start with centering, finding out where you are efficiently in space, and then grounding, connecting in gravity downwards, right? Energetically, this is very, very important. And paths that don't include grounding are paths that can leave you feeling pretty erratic and kind of whacked out. Hang on one second. So as I was mentioning, there's a lot of practices that are kind of ungrounded practices, and there's a time and a place for lifting and raising energy for sure. But before you go up, you want to go down, right? You need to have your feet on the ground before you reach from the stars, to be kind of cliche about it. But this idea of developing a really intimate relationship with the ground, when you do Qigong more, there's an idea that you can start moving a lot of energy. And if you're not able to ground it out, it can leave your nervous system kind of frazzled. And this is why I caution against any kind of Qigong practice that you learn from a book, because we're not sure what their grounding and centering principles are. And sometimes they just miss them because they're trying to give people strong energetic experiences, right? So there's some very huffy puffy, hyperventilating kind of Qigong practices, and also pranayamas from the yoga tradition that can make all sorts of weird things happen in your experience. You can see visions and have energetic currents moving through your body. But if you're not grounded and centered, this is actually not going to do you any favors. It's going to leave you less stable than you were when you started. And This is not just theory. This is something that I've seen and treated people with in the clinic, people that did certain practices that left them feeling less stable and end up with heart palpitations, anxiety, insomnia, mania, and things like that because their practices did not have strong centering and grounding. If you have a strong ground wire, you can move a lot of energy. If you don't have a strong ground wire, we don't know what's going to happen. So centering and grounding, we're already learning those practices, right? The next principle is being whole and unified. Essentially what this means is being able to hold all of your experiences in sort of a soft gaze focus, right? So it's one skill to be able to move your awareness around your body and focus in a particular area. When we do acupuncture, we're often focusing our intention and energy in our fingertips through the needle, right? Through the needle. That's great, but we also want to be able to not just feel the part, but feel the whole. So often at the end of a practice, we'll just stand in a posture and feel all of our entire body experience at once, right? Without running around and being, okay, now I'm feeling my head, now I'm feeling my chest, now I'm feeling my body, now I'm feeling my knee, now I'm feeling my feet, now I'm feeling my elbows. That's okay, but also being able to back off and just be like, this is all of me at once, right? And we find that there's opportunities to do this in our normal life. So often if we like get into a hot tub and feel that whole body relaxation, or we get a massage and afterwards we feel, or we get an acupuncture treatment and everything just kind of opens up and our whole body is kind of at this nice, pleasant, vibrating hum, right? So this is part of our practice, is cultivating that by doing it, by practicing doing it. And it can be challenging at first, especially if we have monkey mind and we kind of like very busy head and we like to jump around. This one can be a little bit challenging, but as we build our energy, as we build our chi through these practices, the sensations will start to, I won't say drown out, but kind of sneak into the forefront, and the thoughts and dialogue about it will kind of fade into the background. And we don't need them to disappear. We just want a proportionality where the sensations are in front and the sort of mental chatters in the background, right? The fourth principle that Peter Ralston discusses is relaxing, right? Being able to let go of the mind and muscles and allow the body to attain a natural, open, unused state, right? And I really like the way he says an unused state. So often when we engage our mind or engage our body, it's for a purpose, right? It's very goal directed. Like I'm thinking about something to get a solution, right? Or I'm doing something to get something to do something with my body that has a goal, right? But relaxing is really like everything is just fine right where we are, and we're going to be with it, right? So one of the books that one of my Taiji Qigong teachers wrote was called Relaxing into Your Being. And this is a very Taoist principle that we need to relax with what is. And even just by being with what is and accepting it, this naturally opens things up to a kind of relaxing into it, right? We can't resist the situation. And we can't even, it's not even really effective to try to change the situation until we're with the situation completely. And this is really what relaxing is. It's just being with what is. And letting go of any kind of excessive tension. In class, either this week or in one of the weeks coming up, we're going to be doing a standing meditation practice that's really about scanning the body for tension and gently asking it to sort of relax and open. So very, very important here. And this is also super important in your acupuncture practice. If you enter into an acupuncture treatment session as a provider in a state where you're not relaxed, it's much more difficult to get the results you want. And it's much more difficult to get your patient to relax, right? Because we're resonant beings, right? Your relaxation, your calm presence will open up a place where they can also feel calm and present, right? And this brings us to our last one, being calm. Learning to allow the mind and attention to be undisturbed by circumstance and refrain from creating negative or inappropriate thoughts and reactions. This is a heavier way of stating it than I might say, because it's very difficult to absolutely refrain from creating negative or inappropriate thoughts and reactions, but not engaging with negative and inappropriate thoughts and reactions that might arise, right? If we're too obsessed with refraining from it, we might end up trying to suppress it, and we know suppressing never works. It just kind of pops things up other places like a whack-a-mole game, right? So learning to allow the mind and attention to be undisturbed by circumstance is pretty important. Just being calm, being, a classic example that I might give is inevitably when you are learning acupuncture, and still after years of practice, you'll needle somebody and they'll have a strong reaction that's unpleasant, like, oh, geez, that hurts so much, If you get freaked out, if you're like, oh my God, here, let me help you. What did I do? Oh, I'm so sorry. Then they get more freaked out, right? If you can stay calm in that circumstance, like, oh yeah, that's a pretty zingy point, huh? If that's too intense for you, we can certainly take it out or adjust it, right? This is way better. Your calm will reassure them that they can be calm as well, right? And I love this, that like if you listen to recordings of like astronauts or something like that, they always have this like smooth jazz voice. They're like, yep, the burner's not firing. We have a problem, Houston. It's never like, oh my God, the burner's not firing. They're always so calm and measured. And this kind of being calm, regardless of circumstances, is something you can cultivate, right? And it's something that will definitely help you sink into the other principles of having an effortlessly effective body being. So let's think about these a little bit and see what we can do to start to embody these. We'll do some specific exercise in addition to the ones that we've already done that can help enhance these. But I really, really like this. It's very pithy. It's a very succinct way of summarizing sort of what we're looking to put into our experience when we're practicing Taiji or Qigong or practicing acupuncture or providing care for other people. So take a look at this. Take a look at the handout about the handout for week 4, which has these principles as well as some acupuncture points and a little quote at the end, which is from a more classical source that says the same thing that Peter Ralston is saying here. And then also take a look at this health journal assignment. It's a 2-week assignment. It takes 2 weeks to do. I'm giving you 3 weeks to do it. So you have a little bit of wiggle room about when you want to start, when you have room on your schedule, but it's not a big ask. It's just a quick scribble every day about, these different domains that we discussed. And then at the end, there's going to be a couple paragraphs of reflection. So not too difficult. I'll get this up on Neo as well as the assignments. And I look forward to talking to everybody on Thursday. I hope you're all practicing. Thanks.